Now it brings us to what I actually had you on the podcast for, which means way more robots.
Yeah.
And way more AI agents out there crawling and doing different things. How do you see that affecting what we know as digital commerce? Because I should also mention you're from Blue Acorn and you help people with selling, products online and making decisions about, what sells and who it sells to and stuff, which can be really challenging.
I think it was bad. It was bad. Bots were bad. Bad is like a tricky term. Like, is it bad? I don't know. It data
was confusing and difficult. Yeah,
it was confusing and difficult before, but no one really wanted to acknowledge it. And by that, I'm painting broad strokes here, but by that I mean, like, bots were an issue before, right? People could create crawlers to crawl people's website and use what are called proxies, which basically it's kind of like a VPN. You pretend you're from a different location, and then you hit a site, and you can cycle between hundreds of different user agents and generate all sorts of fake traffic. And people do that to, like, scrape websites, and some people do it for fun. Some people do it for fraud. And it's sometimes, I say some people, sometimes it's bots creating bots. And now with kind of this agentic traffic that we see from, GPT, that we're seeing from all sorts of models that we saw with Auto GPT a while ago, which, produced agentic traffic a little bit of a different way. But what we're seeing is a mental shift. Like, people are a lot more open, which they weren't before. A lot of people weren't open to the fact that, like, by the way, you have a lot of robots crawling your website. Now people are a lot more open to it. I think it's because they see opportunity. I think with optimizing their website so that this agentic AI and this agentic traffic, and I'm pretty sure it's agentic traffic. Am I using that word correctly, Mike?
Yeah,
or is this,
I think so. And yeah, let me sum up what I'm hearing you say. Is, like, I think in layman's terms, like, if till it happens to you or until you're doing it, you don't think anybody is. So it wasn't on anybody's radar. And you're like, oh, if I told you, half of the traffic on the roads is speeding, going over the speed limit, you go, yeah, way more than that, because I'm speeding all the time. Right. And so everybody must be speeding. I don't see a whole lot of people going slower than me.
Yeah.
Right. And now it's kind of like, okay, we realize we're speeding too. We're sending robots out there. If we're sending robots out there, so are other people. And it's kind of shifted where if you were always following the rules and you didn't have access to robots and agents, really think that, well, they can't be that bad. I don't. But
I mean, if a tree falls in the woods,
that with me before, like, over 50% of internet traffic was probably robots before we even realized.
There are a lot of studies that'll give you different numbers, and I think 50% is probably way off, but in that, it's like, I'd say it's probably low as opposed to high, and it's one of those things where I think it's hard for people to come to terms with the fact that there's fraud and bots all over the place, and how do you pitch that internally, saying, like, okay, well, we've operated like everything's normal, like all of our data comes from humans, and everything is just fine, and we know that there is some marginal degree of error in our data, and we're fine living with that. But then all of a sudden you tell your
boss, by the way, marketers like it too. They go, oh, we had 30,000 hits on the website this month, boss. Like, we're doing great. Traffic's going
big
up.
Numbers, line go up. We're all happy. We're celebrating. Look at all these impressions, a digital billboard. And it's like, yeah, a lot of that's fake and fraudulent. And how do you tell okay, so if you're on the vendor side, I'm on the vendor side, I do consulting. Like, if you're in charge of media buying, how do you tell your client that, like, by the way, I just kind of, we audited our work and realized that, by the way, we just wasted 95% of your budget. And that's a realistic number if you're running programmatic and display.
Right.
I've seen worse than 95% fraud. I've seen up to 20%, 15 to 20% fraud with paid search. That's egregious, but I've seen it.
Yeah.
How do you go back to your client, and if you're the client, how do you then tell your boss that, by the way, I just hired an agency that did this? if you work in data and you're managing campaign performance and analytics, it's another one of those things where it's like, how do I suddenly go back and say all the data that I've been reporting, all these dashboards that I built for you, all these decisions that we've been making, all these KPIs that we've been reporting, our denominators are way off, even sometimes our numerators, sometimes with fake purchases and stuff like that. And we've seen that because bots can fill out forms. And so
Conversion,
what's
for sure.
cool, yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and what's cool though is we're moving into an era where not all those bots are bad, because you have a agentic kind of AI that could be making purchases for the user, which is super cool. And we want them to do that. And so now we have this question of like, okay, do we block all these bots? Which ones do we block? Which ones do we let through? And the only way to do that is to have, to you have to have a way to measure them and differentiate those bots.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I want to ask you about that in a minute, because I don't think, if people haven't heard this before, they've really thought this through. So before we get there, tell me a little bit about the results and why marketers are struggling with this. They don't realize that over half of the clicks on their ads, or even the impressions and stuff, are fake. So when they're A/B testing ads, even if we just go with impressions, we don't know which one was displayed to humans and which one was displayed to robots. And then if we look at clicks, we could say, well, just on the timing or the sheer number, the robots clicked on these ads more than the other ones, and so we're showing these. Then if you're looking at form fills and stuff like that, we know a certain amount of form fills are fake, because we've tried to, our sales teams and our BDRs have been reaching out to these people, and they're like, they don't know what the heck we're talking about. And some of the conversion rates that we've been looking at, we've been happy with 3 to a 10% conversion was great, but it turns out that could have been 80% conversion of the actual humans.
Who knows?
To the page. We have no idea. And so all of the marketing that we've been doing has kind of just been either to robots or largely for show, right? Like, talk about some of the consequences of this.
Sure. I mean, you've talked about some of those consequences, right? It impacts A/B testing. Now, in theory, you're displaying, let's talk about a basic
similar amount of things.
Yeah, similar amounts to each one. But I mean, when you saturate your traffic with bots, you're much more likely to hit a null hypothesis, basically meaning we'd ever reach statistical significance showing that treatment A is better than treatment B or whatever. Not just so it impacts those results. Tests take longer. You have that much more traffic that's putting load on your servers, right? And that has cost implications. You're making decisions about content and content affinity, especially if you run a blog or website or create literally any kind. If you have a website, bots impact different sections of the website differently. And so you're like, oh man, people really love our widgets. And it's like, I don't think you know what people are. And so, on top of that, you have people who are being held accountable to benchmarks. And benchmarks typically, or let's say like conversion rate, have a numerator and denominator. And I was talking earlier about affecting numerators and denominators. You have a benchmark of like, well, the average conversion rate for our industry is 3%. I'm like, that means nothing to me. Because who are you getting this data from? How clean is their data? What percent of their traffic is real versus fake? Because the calculation for conversion rate is like conversions per, usually, like, let's say retail, it's easy. Purchases over total site visits, traffic, visits, sessions, whatever. If you're running that calculation and 30% of your sessions are not real, then you're going to be deflating your conversion rate. Especially when you compare it to someone else who might have much better hygiene and has a much higher conversion rate. So nothing is like it. And what kills me as an analyst is like, this is like an existential crisis for me as one who runs data, right? Because everything that we've been talking about in our industry, we've assumed that we have adequate hygiene. And we're so busy trying to make sure that all of our tags are there and everything looks good. And it's like, many of us do not stop to think about whether or not the agent that is triggering that tag is human or non-human, which is
Yeah,
like
it causes
mind-blowing.
a lot of problems. I've seen a couple of things in my career. One I noticed on really early when I was trying to build audiences and stuff and new websites. And when you launch a site, the first people that find it are not people, they are robots. And
Right.
so you're like, okay, we're getting a lot of, either like you said, crawlers, which are great. We want to be indexed. We're getting a
Mhm.
lot of malicious form fills and spam coming in and links to cheap pharmaceuticals and blue pills and stuff. Okay, great.
Yeah.
We know that's going to happen. And then the second phase I've noticed when actual humans come in is competitors. And you're like,
Yep.
okay, well, they're going to click on our ads because they want to see what our forms look like. What's our
Mhm.
landing page say? And they're going to click on it because, oh, great, I can cost, Jim $5 and I get to see what our competitors doing. Let's click on it. And,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Then we start kind of getting our clients and things in there, which is still not making us any money, but of course they're looking us up. If we have any clients, they're gonna search
Oh
for our
yeah.
name and find it. And then you kind of start getting like top of the funnel tire kickers and stuff, and people that are like they found it or they did a search, but it was the wrong
They're
long tail keyword thing.
developers that are, since most of us work remote now, that are running regression testing with like Selenium and stuff like that, which is basically like an automation tool, right? They're just hitting the site constantly,
Yeah.
sending thousands of server calls, and that happens on staging and production. It's nuts.
And so, yeah, like that mixes in the middle. And then if you do it long enough, like I'm talking
Yeah.
about years, you start actually building an audience of humans. And so
Mhm.
if you podcast or you blog or you post on social media regularly for let's say maybe 18 months, you'll
Yeah.
finally get like one call that's like, "Hey, I'm looking to buy your stuff. Well, I googled you and you came up, you had great reviews, and so I'm calling," and things, and you're like, wow, that hasn't happened yet. And it's
Oh, I
taken a
know.
year and a half for us to build up the credibility and wade through all of the trash traffic in order to get to a real human.
What's remarkable and counterintuitive, especially in analytics, is at some point you kind of realize that just doing the right thing, building the right product, thinking about your audience, thinking about your consumer, that that's going to supersede data 10 out of 10 times. Do the
Yeah.
right thing and you'll get the right results. And measurement's important. Like, and it kind of feels weird as someone who's like built his
Yeah. It's your
career
livelihood.
on, it's my livelihood. But and measurement is important. It's so important. It's important to understand, that's how you forecast, that's how you create budgets, that's how you can make, decisions. But none of it matters if your product sucks,
Well, that too.